information architect. He's come all the way from Michigan to be here, so we're excited about that. He founded the Understanding Group and also teaches information architecture at the University of Michigan. And today I will invite you to give a warm welcome to Dan Klyn.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Everything that she said was true, except that I didn't start the Understanding Group by myself. I'm a co-founder, and my business partner, Bob, is here. And 4 years ago or so, the two of us starting an information architecture consulting company was a little bit maybe counterintuitive to how the world works. For many of us who work in, when people call the world that we work in UX sort of broadly, where the information architecture part is in there isn't always easy to find. And so we've focused on that, and a lot of what we're interested in as information architects is differentiating the value that we bring, trying to explain this stuff in ways that would seem valuable to the people who have to make digital products and services all day long. So I'm curious to know, you all, who here has to make digital products and services all day long? Many of us, okay. So Marshall McCluhan, I have my father was a history teacher for 300 years, and we could go nowhere in the world on vacation without running into his former students, and history is something that became really interesting to me because of my dad. And information architecture is not new. It was created in 1976 or so. And so a lot of what I talk about in terms of information architecture has a little bit of history to it. It's retrieving some of the ways of thinking about this from before digital to try to help us understand it in the world that we live in now. And so Marshall McCluhan is one of these. Richard Saul Wurman, the inventor of information architecture, if you hear me talking, if I have my mouth open, it's usually something about Richard Saul Wurman coming out of it. So this is a little bit of a departure for me, although not too far, because it's somebody from the past who I think has a lot to say to us right now. Somebody who could, from the past, who saw today, which is great. So who here has heard this phrase that belongs to Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message? Have we all heard this out in the world? It is not a straightforward thing. To take it at face value, what that might mean is not, I don't know about you, but there's not intuitive access to what that means, because what is a medium and what is message? It begs some really interesting questions. And people during McLuhan's time didn't know what to do with him. They couldn't figure him out. And he collaborated with a graphic designer to try to help explain some of these extraordinarily strange things that he says. And so something like the medium is the message. He talked about a phrase like that. He considered that turn of phrase to be a probe. And if you think about, I'm a child of Star Wars, a lot of the metaphors that I think of are in terms of Star Wars. So probe, think of the ice planet Hoth. There's that robotic creature that is sent there to see what's going on, to take readings from this strange place, and then send signal back up to the mothership. And so he's using language as like probes. And even that is strange. He said things like, I don't necessarily agree with everything that I say. Which sounds like, and this isn't the Walt Whitman, well, I contradict myself, I contain multitudes. That isn't what he's saying. He's throwing these probes of language out into the environment to see if they hit anything, see if they work. And the medium is the message is one of those probes that seems to have worked, even though very few of us really understand what that means. And this graphically interesting book called The Medium is the Massage was an attempt by McCluhan to be better understood. Because he knew that there was an understanding gap between all of these things that he was saying and what people were able to understand. So he doesn't necessarily agree with everything that he says. This challenges when we look for credibility in people who are saying important stuff. this undermines traditional kinds of ways that we establish credibility. And so questions were asked at the time that McCluhan was most active in his work as a media ecologist. And that was a new thing. That was a probe, the idea that media are an environment and that he could be working as an ecologist in that environment. That was also new. So people didn't know what to do with him at the time that he was most active. And this is a quote from Tom Wolfe, I believe. Yes, in Playboy magazine in 1969. This may be the origin of the excuse that you read it for the articles. Fascinating interview with Marshall McLuhan in Playboy magazine. And Tom Wolfe, who's not a shabby observer of American culture, getting to know this guy a little bit and then saying, you know, if what he says is right, because he says a lot of crazy stuff, but if what he's talking about is true, then we're dealing with a titan. We're dealing with somebody whose understanding is vast, and we need to catch up to and pay attention to this guy. So the first question, and I apologize, there isn't audio amplification in here. I have a couple of things that you're maybe not going to be able to hear, although this one has some words along with it. But let's listen to asking the question, was McCluhan right? Just generally in this weird way that he had to look at the world.
Instead of going out and buying a package book, of which there have been 5,000 copies printed, you will go to the telephone, describe your interests, your needs, your problems, and say, I'm working now as a Egyptian arithmetic. I know a bit of Sanskrit. I'm qualified in German, and I am a good mathematician. It'll be right over. And they run Xerox with the help of computers from the libraries of the world, all the latest material just for you personally. Well, there's something to be put out on the bookshelf. They send you the package as a direct personal service. This is where we're heading under electronic information conditions. Products increasingly are becoming services.
1966. So McCluhan was right about some things, including that to me sounds like a prediction of Amazon. A lot of the way that we will be living still in the future ahead from today is envisioned by Marshall McLuhan in 1966. And he's doing this on the basis of saying this is about the conditions of electronic media, that the environment of digital, it just points in this direction, and he saw where it went. So really fascinating man, and I'd like to dig in a little bit into this question of, well, what does this mean? The medium is the message. It's described at length in a book called Understanding Media, and I have not been able to read this book in longer sessions than about 20 minutes or so. It's incredibly dense. So here's the shorter version of what I think that this teaching means, and then I'll talk about why this is relevant to what we do as the people who work on digital products and services. So McCluhan said that the content of any medium is like the juicy piece of meat carried by the burglar to distract the watchdog of the mind. That when we are engaging with media, that the content of the medium is working us over completely, and that we are not aware of what the medium itself is doing to us because we're distracted by the tasty piece of meat. And why this might be relevant to what we do, I think it's relevant in a huge number of ways, but if you look at content strategy, the rise of content strategy in the work that we all do, and we've all heard it said, right? Content is king. It's all about the content. McCluhan said that the relative power of the content of any given medium compared with the medium itself and the power of the medium is like the stenciling on the case of a nuclear bomb. The bomb is the medium. These things don't even work in a necessary connection to each other. The medium can be doing things to us that is the opposite of what the content says it's doing to us. He said that the conventional response, and he didn't mean this to be an insult, I don't think. I believe he considers himself subject to this same strange effect, but that our conventional response to content, to medium and message, is so focused on message that we are numb. We're numb technological idiots relative to what these media are doing to us. And he used the myth of Narcissus to explain this. And he even gave it the name of Narcissus narcosis to describe the sort of sleepiness that we are under, where we don't understand the difference between medium and message. And if you recall the myth of Narcissus, the nymphs in the forest where Narcissus would travel through frequently, they were in love with him. And they wanted him to frolic with them like you do, and he didn't. And that made them angry. So the nymphs asked the gods to curse Narcissus by giving him the experience of unrequited love. And the mechanism that the gods came up for with this is ingenious. His vanity. That's one of the reasons why he wasn't interested in frolicking with the nymphs. He was frolicking with himself, let's say. And so he sees his reflection in the stream, and we all know how the story goes, right? Narcissus is so beguiled by his image in the stream that he can't pay attention to anything else. He falls in love with it. He touches it, and the image goes away, and then he has to stay there till the water is stilled, and then it comes back, and he keeps reaching for it, and he can't get it, and he eventually falls into the water and dies. And this is about medium and message. The medium is reflective surface. The content is his image. And not understanding the difference between what that reflective surface can do as a medium, that we can use that for our advantage if we understand it, but we are subject to its tyranny if we are only paying attention to the content. So this explanation of the medium is the message. It depends on you being okay with and accepting something that he contends, and this was a much stranger contention in 1966, which is that media are an environment. That this is an ecosystem that we're talking about, not just a thing. It isn't just an article. It isn't just your product details page. That these are environments. And he said that, if we want to understand and affect social and cultural change, we need to think about this and be working in terms of environment, not in terms of discrete things. And a embarrassing and prosaic example of this, of not working in terms of environment, is the national health care rollout. They spent as much money as you can imagine on this. There were all these independent groups. They made things out of the components of the system, had a whole bunch of different teams working on it, and then expected to be able to, that'd be like if we all had our little terraria, and I've got a frog in mine, and you've got a Komodo dragon in yours, and somebody's got a ferret in theirs, and then and then there's a big terrarium at the end, and then we all sort of dump ours in, and then, hey, it didn't work. Part of that is the seduction of focusing on the thing, and because it's terrifying to pull back and say, this is an environment. This is a ecosystem. That is harder, and it doesn't fit into scopes of work as nicely. It's harder to sell. It's harder to just embrace. And then we also have this, again, the Narcissus narcosis. This says environments are invisible. Their ground rules, pervasive structure, and overall patterns elude easy perception. So part of medium and message is we aren't seeing, there's something going on that's precluding us from even seeing these things in terms of environment. So why does this matter? I think it matters because oftentimes we get to choose, not only are we authoring the content, but we can choose, if you're working as a freelancer or you're a UX team of one, you can choose the medium. So not only what is the content that I'm going to convey, but should that be a presentation like this one with a projector? Should it be on paper? Should it be a papier-mâché assemblage of some sort? If we get to choose or influence the medium, and if we could line up medium and content, then that's awesome. That's like a force multiplier that we're not even aware of. The potential benefit of synergizing medium and message. And then it also matters when you don't get to pick. When you work in a company and they have a sort of a way of doing deliverables, here's the standard UI spec, go make one for this. You're replacing the content. That's what when I started out in this business, I was a junior, and they had these 150-page UI specs, and it was full of the last project's wireframes and descriptions. It's like, okay, take out all of Brookstone, and we're going to put in TJ Maxx. Only working in terms of the content, the medium was pretty much not available to me to change. They didn't want me to improve the company's process. They wanted me to follow the process, and part of following the process is using the medium in the way that it's been used. So this is pretty important. And then, especially when it gets really doctrinaire, as it sometimes does these days, where the tools and the medium that you're allowed to work in is sort of part of some agile religion about what you may and may not do. Documentation is bad. That kind of thinking. So medium and message, how do we understand what the medium is capable of? How do we abstract it from the messages that we want to put in these media? These are hard questions. And it gets down to this notion of inherency. And I have another little video clip to play for you, and I don't know. Were you able to hear that at all last time? A little bit? Okay.
If you think of brick, for instance, you say to brick, what do you want, brick? And brick says to you, I like an arch. And if you say to brick, look, arches are expensive, and I can use a concrete lintel over you. What do you think of that, brick? Brick says, I like an arch. And it's important, you see, that you honor the material that you use. You don't bandy it around as though you said, well, we have a lot of material around. We can do it one way, we can do it another. It's not true. You can only do it if you honor the brick and glorify the brick instead of just shortchanging it.
So that's the American architect Lou Kahn. He was the teacher of my hero, Richard Saul Wurman, the inventor of information architecture. And this is kind of a joke among architects, like, yeah, asking brick what it wants. Dead serious, completely sincere. The brick has, back to that word of inherencies, there's something in here. The thing that you're using, the whiteboard, has inherent tendencies of what it wants to do for you, what it can do for you helpfully. And if you are at odds with what it wants, if brick likes an arch and you just put a concrete lintel over it and you just sort of shortchange it, as Lou Kahn was saying, that's not good. Being sensitive to the materiality of the things that we make, and reading them and aligning them with what we want them to do, not being oblivious to the ways that these media have power on their own. And a really vivid example of this, and everything that I've learned about Marshall McLuhan, I've learned from my friend Shane Hipps. This is a picture of him talking about Marshall McLuhan, of all things. And I don't know if you can read it, but it's Times New Roman, it's words. And the words say, "The boy is sad." And, okay, that has a certain effect on us. And then what does this do? This is completely, completely different. The medium of image, so we've got the printed word. What is the printed word good for? What is the rhetorical style of words? What is the physiological effect of words versus images? Shane says he found a quote from Marshall McLuhan that I haven't found the original source for, but I think it's great. McCluhan says, images pin themselves to the back of the brain. And those of us who are amateurs who've heard about psychology and physiology, I'm one of those, the lizard brain, the older part of our cognition, responds to images instantaneously. There's an intuitive thing that's going on there that you can't control. You may have heard people say, a unicorn chaser. I need to look at pictures of kittens after what you just showed me because I can't unsee that picture anymore. The medium of words relative to the medium of pictures, doesn't matter what the words say. Really, these media, doesn't matter what the picture is, just the essence of picture is different than the essence of words. And we all can make choices a lot, or of no picture. Making these choices not in terms of content, but in terms of, well, what is this doing to my audience? If I show them a picture at this point, how will that change what they're able to understand? I saw this on Twitter the other day. This is a really good example. A bookstore where books are wrapped in paper with short descriptions so no one will judge a book by its cover. Can you imagine at Amazon scale if this were a thing? The way that we would engage with the medium of book would be fundamentally changed. And I would love to talk with the retailer about this and how it works. Fascinating. So medium and message, not the same thing. And McCluhan believed that all media can be understood through four laws or four tendencies of any medium. And that's what I would like to show you. So McCluhan says the first thing that all media do, and his definition of medium is anything that people use or make to extend their what they came into this world with. This is a medium. Slide clicker is a medium. Chair is a medium. Anything that we use or make to help us beyond what our bodies do inherently is a medium. So any of these things enhance something that people want or do. Any medium also, and this is a little bit strange, and I'll give you some examples, retrieve some prior medium. Any new media will retrieve properties of some prior medium that existed that we already understood. McCluhan also believed that media have the tendency to cause other media to be obsolete. And by obsolete, he meant not only don't need it anymore, but there's a more nuanced sense of obsolete, which is changing the function of, and I'll give you an example of that. And then the last property is that when we push media, and this is like the canary in the coal mine of medium, how do you know if you are using your medium in ways that are at odds with what it wants? Any medium that's pushed too far reverses into the thing, like into its opposite. A very strange tendency, but I will demonstrate this with examples. And back to, and the first example that I'll run this little media analysis on is whiteboard. The slide earlier is sort of the agile manifesto of the only tool that you ever get to use is whiteboard. Well, what is the medium of whiteboard then? We use whiteboards to enhance the scope and density of what we can talk about together in real time. This is how I understand this medium of whiteboard. If we didn't have, if we didn't have the whiteboard, the number of things we could talk about would be fewer, and the scope, the complexity, etc. What does it retrieve? If we didn't have a whiteboard, we could still do a lot of that with a stick in the dirt. There are conversations we could have together. If I had a stick in the dirt, I could bring more things into the consideration set, and we could interact with them quite better than if we had to rely on our just recollection of talking about things. What does it obsolesce? Chalkboards. It's not like, screw you, chalkboards. We don't need you anymore. Let there never be any more chalkboards. But where do you see chalkboards now? Decorating stores. You see cute little knick-knacky chalkboards that are hearkening back to there's sort of a old-timey kind of pleasure in having a little chalkboard that by your refrigerator where you write things. And then if pushed too far, and this is my indictment of a lot of our UX work with whiteboards, if you push this too far, it's documentation. These other tendencies about the medium, these are about talking together in real time. The wind could blow. Some jerk could come by and ever have a whiteboard erased before somebody could take a picture of it? Well, that's what it wants to do. It doesn't want to be documentation. And our smartphones have allowed us to misuse this medium as documentation. Take a picture of it, and then now it's the UI spec. And there's another tendency of all media, according to Marshall McCluhan. He considered media to be either hot or cool. Not hot or cold, hot or cool. And in the McCluhanian sense, whiteboard is a cool medium. And I have one more clip of McCluhan talking about what he means by the difference between hot and cool.
You said that bad news was indispensable to newspapers. Is the same thing true for television?
Well, it's like saying if TV is a cool medium, then you can't use it for hot jobs. Like the Vietnam War is a hot war, and it won't go on TV. It's the first war ever, a hot shooting war ever shown on a cool medium. The cool medium involves the whole audience so deeply they find war unbearable. Show the same war on movie, on press, photography, and so on, people won't feel too badly about it. But on TV, they really feel it. They're involved for the first time. And so LBJ is making a great big mistake in trying to have a hot war on a cool medium.
So think about TV in 1967. And that's why I say whiteboards are a cool medium. The reason that the Vietnam War was as disastrous to our psyche as a nation, these grainy images on TV, cool media cause us to project ourselves in to make sense of it. And so low fidelity, low resolution mediums cause more participation. And that's why whiteboards are great. The tendency of the medium wants us to put ourselves in there, not to consume and read it. Again, that's why my contention of whiteboard is not documentation. It doesn't want to be a hot medium is the laser beam. A hot medium would be like McCluhan famously and controversially said, the rise of National Socialism in Germany would never have happened if TV had come out earlier. Radio is an incredibly hot medium. It's a laser beam into your cognition. And hearing these fascists railing on the radio is a big part of why these disastrous things happen to our culture. And you can see some of this hot cool in why many of us now hate and won't use the telephone to talk on. But we will text and email, and we want to cool it down. It's too, really? You want me to call a person and talk in real time? That's a hot medium, but texting is cool. You don't really know what I meant, even with the little winky. So hot and cool mediums, and knowing when we are working with media, how we understand them to be situated. Which version of these laws do we want to be governing our use of a thing? And so wireframe, this can be either a hot or a cool medium, depending on how you use it. And what's a problem in our work is we throw these things around as if everybody knows what they are, and as if, so I'll make this point maybe better by working the laws. So my preferred way of applying the laws of media to wireframe, what is this medium enhancing for me? It's enhancing the ability of stakeholders to consider what might be good to do. What is it retrieving? If anybody, did anybody see my talk yesterday? I have a recycled bit of the dumb model thing. What do these kinds of wireframes, using the medium of wireframe this way, retrieve? The architects and the old-fashioned architects, maquette, the cardboard and loofahs and sticks model. Oops. Oh, man. I hate it when it does that. What is it obsolesce? Documentation. It doesn't remove the need for documentation, but it changes the function of documentation because of the way that the rest of these laws are working. This is what we're considering what might be good to do. But it's just a dumb model. We could just throw it away. This is something different than than your father's documentation, let's say. And then if we push it too far, it would be a specification for how to make it. I'm trying to not use it as how. I'm trying to use it as what. So in this way, and I'm also trying to use it to elicit all kinds of feedback from the client and from my team. So I'm trying to use this as a cool medium. And this same tool, the same media, can be used in a completely different way, or you could analyze this from a completely different perspective of a hot medium. And I think this is more typically how this artifact, this deliverable, gets used in UX, to enhance the ability of designers to specify how a thing will be built. It's retrieving what when engineers work with architects in the built environment, there are these things called working drawings. The project architect comes up with the conceptual stuff, and then engineers have to make working drawings out of all of those details to make sure the math works properly and that the building doesn't fall down. What is it obsolesce? I think you can, and we see this, that comps, back in the early 2000s, late 90s, the way that you would do this work might be with comps. But if you're using the wireframe in this manner as a hot medium, maybe you don't need those anymore. Maybe those are just pitch candy. And then if you're doing it wrong, if you push this too far, it reverses into the actual product. And the high fidelity wireframes with the drop shadows and all the perfect typography, and it's all been spell checked. I've had clients, and this is how I know I was doing it wrong. I've had clients say, "Oh, this looks so great. Can't this just be the website? We wouldn't have to quibble with all the color problems and the pictures. I like the big boxes with X's in them." So that's a hot medium. And so what is it? Which is it? Which one is true? Is this a hot medium or a cool medium? I think that these laws I think they're open to interpretation. I like the idea that if you are seeing it one way, that occludes your ability to see it the other way. We mutually occlude one another's way of working because we talk about wireframes. We're not talking about what they're for, and that there could be a difference between my wireframe and your wireframe. Because, hey, everybody makes wireframes. That's what you do. Let's do the IA. Get the wireframers out. So I'm going to repeat this. Who wasn't here yesterday, or who didn't see me talk yesterday? Okay, well, I will repeat a little clip that I showed yesterday. This is the last piece of video that you can't really hear.
What Maury said I was willing to do for you. Let's get back to the reason that we're really here. Without much further ado, I give you the Derek Zoolander Center for Kids Who Can't Read Good. What is this? A center for ants? What? How can we be expected to teach children to learn how to read if they can't even fit inside the building? Derek, it's just a... I don't want to hear your excuses. The center has to be at least 3 times bigger than this.
That's us. That's us giving a high fidelity prototype to a client really early on in the process. Do they know what we're showing them? And was I showing that to them for the same reason that they thought they were being shown it? When we work there's the apocryphal story of Steve Jobs needed 10 perfectly photoshopped comps of any new piece of UI. Show me 10 different ways to do it, and if I can tell that it's any different than what would be real, you're fired. These kinds of dumb models that the client could never mistake for the actual product, let's help the people that we are trying to work with understand what they're seeing. Not just assuming that, okay, this is a prototype. Well, what does that mean? What are we trying to use this for? Are we using it to figure out how we're going to make it? Or are we still exploring what we're going to do, what might be good to do? Are we doing this in a hot way where I want to put a laser beam into your brain and give you the thing that I think we should do? Or do I want this to be a cool kind of medium that's going to elicit your participation? It's hard because they all look pretty much the same. And the words, I can use any of these hot or cold. Any of these are good for figuring out what might be good to do. And any of these can be used to specify how you're going to do it. So being able to differentiate between medium and message, knowing what you want out of the medium, and even giving yourself the permission to do both. When Lucan is being an architect, he's staring off into space, contemplating what Brick wants. He can be that guy and use these media to figure out what's inherent in these media. What does it want to be? And then on the job site, here he is with his little hard hat on. This is a wonderful moment from the film My Architect, where he's at the Kimball Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, and there's all these good old boy engineers like, what the hell is he? Because the architect is supposed to be done at that point. Like, go away, we'll build it. And he's on the job site with his hard hat, telling them about what kinds of screws he wants put in he's doing the design detailing at this point. Using the tool when you're architecting one way, and then giving yourself the permission to also use the same tool a different way when you're designing. And being able to use that nuance to your advantage. The counter proposal, the counter myth. So don't be Narcissus, be Perseus. In the myth of Perseus, he has a shield, so the same medium, reflective surface, like the reflecting pool of Narcissus. But he understood the difference between what would appear on the surface and the tool in and of itself uses the shield to defeat Medusa. Awesome. So asking the questions of the laws of media to what you are working on, the thing on your desk that you will go back to on Monday. There's content in there. It's a medium, or there are media present. How do these laws operate on what you're working on? My favorite medium, and I'll show you, and then we'll be done, is big paper. We like to use big paper to enhance the ability of co-located mixed context groups to simultaneously view what's being considered. It's a crappy sentence, not even a sentence. But we can all, engineers, stakeholders, strategists, SEO people, everybody can get together around big paper if you're in the same place together. For us, how we use big paper, it's retrieving stained glass windows, the medium of stained glass window. Think of a medieval cathedral. People in the pews are people who can't read. There are people who can read. There are people who know the Bible stories. There are people who don't. Those windows have to work for the whole congregation at all these different levels of understanding. Somebody can just get pretty color out of a stained glass window. Somebody else can get a profound message out of it. What it obsolesces is this crappy thing here, the projector. Or the Jumbotron. Increasingly now there's a gigantic TV in the boardroom. We're not going to be using that for this part of the engagement. And then if we do it wrong, it would reverse into a billboard. Just some big-ass piece of paper that it's up in the hall and people just walk past it and they're not really reading it or engaging with it. And so you may ask the question, how big is big paper? It's pretty big. This is a video of one example of big paper. while you're watching that, let's see. Hey, John, do you want to help me out here? Yeah. This is a small one. This is a baby. So for us with a client, thank God they had this huge warehouse space that they work out of. We got everybody walking around this thing. Everybody works on this site. They publish it every day, and they don't see it. They see their little parts of it, but here we have them all. You can walk through the website. And we've got people who are responsible for this, sort of crouching down and talking about it. And you can, if these are places made of information, which we contend that they are, then this allows you to put people into place. It disrupts their whole, the way their body understands something through walking through and being able to read. The PDF of this is useless. You could never get it all on the screen at the same time. And typically, we just send these giant things to people. And yeah, they'll pan around and they'll zoom on it. We try to not ever give these digitally, to always bring people around the big paper and have the, oh my God, this is our world conversation. And then the other counterpart to giant sitemap. So here's a wireframe. And what's really fun is when you are working with these at this size and you give the client a big fat marker. And they don't want to. They're paying you good money to show up there with fancy things, and they want you to do your little show and blow their mind, and then they go back to what they do. And again, as a cool medium, to understand this, you have to get up and interact with it. You have to project yourself into it. And the moment that I love to, if it's appropriate, at a certain point in the conversation, you can just do this. And they go, oh, but you, it's like, no. This isn't a specification yet. This isn't instructions for anyone. This is just trying to figure out what might be good to do together. And based on the conversation that we just had, this one doesn't work anymore. So how about this one? And the permission this gives you and the client to not hold this dear. If we're still figuring out what might be good to do, that is essential. Because if they're admiring your beautiful work, they don't want to change it. You're already in love with it because you worked on it too long. So, big paper. And the multiplication of media, big paper times wireframes. It's great. So, do 3 things. Be Perseus, not Narcissus. Consider the idea that the content in the thing that you're working on could be operating in a different way than the thing itself. And my gosh, if we can line these things up, if we know what we want out of the medium and then we align our message and content with it, that's great. So questions or objections? Yes?
I'd like to get your take on applying the stuff you've talked about today to delivering research results. So I don't do design, I don't do wireframes or information architecture in the sense you've been talking about. And this was all very helpful, but I'm wondering, in terms of that, what would you suggest or what are your thoughts?
Maybe the place to start is hot or cool, and a research report or a presentation deck. The choice of whether you will give it to them electronically. Maybe starting with that. Do I want this to be a hot thing that's a laser beam into your cranium? Or do I want this to be the starting point or some piece of a conversation and then crafting it with that in mind? Yes?
Can you give some examples of when you would use a hot medium in your daily work? Because it seems like you're trying to take hot ones and turn them cool to get that conversation started. So
Yes.
when would hot be appropriate?
Hot is definitely appropriate in the how time. Once we've gotten to a point, and we try, it's probably torturous to our clients, the constant reminding of that's a how question, we're still in what? That's a how question, we're still in what? I realize that you have to build the website, and that's making you nervous, but we haven't yet decided what we're going to do. Once you pass over that, and for us it's sort of like a triangle that, a triangle that gets skinny, and then another triangle that gets fat, and there's like an overlapping. So as the what starts to pinch off and the how starts to scale up, that's when it starts to get more high fidelity, more annotation, more pictographic, and the cool ones are rhetorical. We're trying to make some arguments for what might be good to do. The hot ones are pictorial. It's like the picture of the sad boy. I want that to say something really specifically. John.
I always appreciate an academic software practitioner conference.
You're welcome. Yes.
Not a quick question. I have a somewhat long-winded question. I'll try to make it quick.
Okay.
As you were talking, I was thinking and channeling Bill Postman, and I'll read you a very quick quote that I looked up as you were talking. He said, "There's almost no fact, whether actual or imagined, that will surprise us for very long, since we have no comprehension and consistent picture of the world, which would make the fact appear as an unacceptable contradiction. In a world without spiritual order, nothing is unbelievable." And he's obviously a Luddite, hates information, hates technology. They're both of the same family. They're deterministic. Are you a McCluhan or are you a McCluhan?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I'm going to have to think about that. I think I'm going to have to read the quote some more and get back to you on that. But I think my preference is to be able to switch. I'm a Gemini, so maybe there are times when it's good to come from the one point of view and then to be able to flip it. Sorry, that was not an answer. I'll get you one, though. I will chase you down with an actual. Yes?
You mentioned Richard Saw Warman. Can you spell
Yes.
that so we can Google it?
Wurman. Wurman. If you look up the TED conference, you will discover that he was the inventor of that. Well, thank you all for your attention.